Excited for today's topic. We've got a very, very, very special guest and a topic that, you know what, is always our most popular in the community. It is all things battle cards. So we've got, drumroll please, we've got Josh Gladstone, a product manager here at Klue, who's going to be sharing his expertise on building effective battle cards that actually help close deals. My one little housekeeping bit before we kick this over to Josh, the person you came here for, and the content we came here for. Big event coming up, February 26th or 27th if you're in the EMEA region, Klue Quarterly, where we share new product updates, what's coming in Klue, and we walk through some of the fun new features that are dropped. There's a ton coming. There's a ton that's being shipped, and I can't wait to share that. So if you're interested in what's coming with Klue, go sign up. It's in the community. Jen's probably dropping a link right now. You can buy it in the Compete community. Make sure to come to Klue Quarterly. It's a blast. Josh, stoked to have you. For those of you that don't know Josh, I'm sure a lot of customers do, because you help our customers build some of the best in class Compete content. That's what you're known for, and I can't wait for you to share some of your expertise. We're talking battle cards today. What's the biggest challenge you face when creating battle cards? Reply in the chat, and I'm going to flip it over to you, Josh. What's the biggest challenge you see with customers when it comes to building?
Such a good question. I would say the biggest challenge we see is, in today's world, there is so much noise when it comes to the amount of content that we can put into our battle cards. So for me, the biggest challenge is sifting through all the noise to find the signal and then using sources to validate some of the content that we have. I think that when there's so much noise out there, you got to make sure you have validated content.
Well, I think I agree. Let's get into this thing. I'm going to flip this over to you and fade into darkness. Josh, take it away.
I'm so pumped to be here today. This is my favorite topic of all time. Truly of all time. I used to be manager of our content services team here at Klue before I'm now a product manager, but in that role on our content team, I would speak with hundreds upon hundreds of curators about this very topic. So it's near and dear to my heart. So as we dive into it, I want to ask everyone a quick question, which is, who here has heard of Microsoft Zune before? If you don't, it's probably because you're younger than me. But if you do, you remember this media player device as Microsoft's attempt at competing against a little known product at the time called the iPod. That's a terrible joke. The iPod was, of course, a smashing success. I mean, this thing was launched in 2001, and 5 years later, it had a 70% market share. That's wild. And the reason being is that it had this familiar ecosystem. People that knew Apple loved Apple. But that didn't stop Zune from wanting a piece of the pie. And the thing is, if you compare these two products on paper, you would think Zune had a pretty good shot of winning. I mean, you can see here, the Zune had a bigger screen. It had a better battery life. And it even allowed two Zune users to share songs with each other by like tapping their Zunes or something. Pretty cool. Don't know exactly how it worked. But despite all this technical specs that tend to be better than the iPod, just 5 years after its launch, the Zune was no more. And the question is, why? Why does a product that is, for all intents and purposes, great end up meeting its demise? And I think that can be boiled down to just two words: user experience. You see, Zune thought that they were competing just against this, the iPod. But really, Zune was competing against something bigger: the iTunes Store, the foundation of the Apple ecosystem that made the iPod incredible to use. And I bet none of us can even remember what the Zune marketplace was called. Was there even one? Probably should have researched that beforehand. But what this teaches us is that it's not enough to make a great product. You also have to design your product and design your deliverable in a way that actually can be used. And folks, I think although it didn't work out with the Zune, we can learn a lot from this with the way that we build our battle cards. You see, all too often, we take all of this amazing content that we spend hours and hours curating, and we throw it into a Word doc or a PDF, and we just say, hey, sales, go and use this. But that is not enough. You need to know how to create great content, and you need to design it in a way that actually gets used. And folks, when you do that, and your sellers want to use the content, that is how we're going to win our competitive deals. And that's exactly what we're here to discuss today. So First things first, how to make great content. We're going to talk about two things. One is the Battlecard essentials you have to include in all of your content. And number two is how to actually source great competitive intelligence. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have the good stuff going into your battle cards, sales will not be interested. But on the other side, we got to talk about how to get your battle cards used. And to do that, we're going to explore 5 battle card best practices that you can start using today. As Adam mentioned, please ask questions in the chat. We got Sam here. He is manager of content services now and an absolute wizard. I think Sylvia from the content team might be in the chat as well. So ask away. But let's dive in. So what are those 2 battle card essentials to include in every battle card? To kick off this convo, I want to share my favorite advertisement of all time. And it's so good, it doesn't even need audio. It's from Audi. Check it out. What do you want in a car? Ugh, isn't that good? Literal chills down my spine right now. Because what Audi has done here, that we all vie to do in our competitive programs, is they've compared themselves against the competition and they've come out on top. And folks, I think that this is a critical element to include in your battle cards. This idea of us versus them, what we call comparison. Now, all too often, when I look at battle cards that have been created before I've worked with curators, a lot of the content is focused just on them or just on us. So if, for example, we'll have a battle card that says, what's their weakness? But what we need to do is contextualize their weakness in the comparison of our strength. Because the truth is, a weakness of theirs can only exist if it's a strength of ours. So this idea that you can't really have light without darkness, it's a little bit philosophical and deep, but we'll run with it. In the similar function, we talk about their strengths a lot. This is what they're good at, and here's what to do about it. But we need to contextualize their strengths against our weaknesses. Because again, you have to have this full story for your sellers to understand not just what to know about them, but what do we know about us? And how does that influence our talk tracks, our actions in the sales cycle? Now, in the middle of our battle cards, we have these things called neutral competitive facts, things like pricing, product overviews, whatever it might be. Now, these can slant one way or the other, depending on how good your sellers are. But really, this idea of comparison is so critical. I mean, let's take a look at an example here. So we have a Why We Win card from a customer I've worked with, which goes, we have a stronger brand, they're expensive, and we have better support. Watch what happens when we bake in this idea of comparison. Now it becomes our trusted 15-year-old brand versus their new immature position, our efficient pricing versus their tiered pricing model, 24/7 support, they're only rocking 8-hour support. How much better is that when a seller can immediately in one sentence see the entire picture? This is how you get your content to be used. You make it more digestible. And so what we're really talking about here is how to create really fantastic facts through this lens of comparison. But we can't stop there. We need to give our sellers something to do with the intel. We call this the act. I love that animation. Let's watch it one more time. Fade away that F. Action. So critical. And let's take a look at that previous example and we'll add some action in here to really tie it all together. So our trusted 15-year-old brand. Well, maybe the action here is a trap question. I'm curious, how important is it for you to work with a company that has a proven track record and experience in the industry? Our efficient usage-based pricing. Maybe there's a discovery question in there. How do you typically see your usage fluctuating month to month? And what about 24/7 support? Maybe the action is a redirect statement. You know, they might offer strong 8-hour support, but hey, if you have overseas staff, our 24/7 support is that much better. Actions don't just have to be talk tracks. They can be anything. It can be a one-pager to send. It can be an email template to share, maybe a video. Whatever it is, you got to ensure that you wrap in actions. And we actually had a question that was sent to us before the session from Clarissa, which was, any tips for how to keep objections, claims, or responses short but still comprehensive? The answer is absolutely yes. And one of my favorite tactics when it comes to actions is the objection handle. And for objection handling, we use a framework that we call ARR, acknowledge, reframe, redirect. Also realizing that ARR has other acronymal meanings, but we'll go with this for now. Here's an example. Their objection, Acme Core has too many features. It can feel overwhelming. That's about us. What we say is, I hear you. Having a lot of features can seem so overwhelming at first. That's the acknowledge. You got to validate that what they're saying is true. Then you say, well, let me reframe this. That's actually why our customers love working with us, though. They can start simple and grow into more advanced features as their needs evolve. And now, let's redirect to get them away from their objection and focused on value. Let's focus on the 2 to 3 core features that align with your immediate goals. What specific challenge are you trying to solve first? This, my friends, is a fantastic objection handle in my mind. So, we've talked about those 2 things, comparison and action. These 2 Battlecard essentials to include in all of your content. And it's actually our favorite framework here at Klue that we call the compact framework. God, the animations on this. You gotta love that. Thank you, Jazz, for the help here from the marketing team. So we've talked about how to actually create great content, but now the question becomes, how do you source great competitive intelligence? And to answer that, I want to talk about one of my favorite brands of all time, which is Starbucks. You see, in the 1990s, Starbucks knew something about themselves. They knew that they were a premium hot coffee company, and they had this presumption that if they focused just on hot coffee, that they were going to crush their competitors. And they were kind of right. But then something happened. In a very hot summer month in California, their store managers had an idea. And they actually called up Starbucks HQ and they said, "Hey, Starbs, something's happening here in California. A lot of customers are asking for cold caffeinated beverages, not the hot stuff that we're known for. They're asking us to put all of your coffee on ice. Maybe we can create a product that will serve them." And Starbucks, well, this was counterintuitive to their presumption of their identity. They were like, "We make hot coffee, so what can we do with this? Well, let's give it a shot." They listened to the front lines, and this led to the creation of their highest profit drink of all time, the Frappuccino. It is essentially a glorified milkshake, but it is delicious. And that's such a powerful lesson that Starbucks can teach us, that even though we know something about ourselves, we can actually learn even more by listening to the front lines. And folks, that is how we can generate incredible competitive intelligence. So, when it comes to a competitive program, there are 3 categories of intel that we have to keep in mind. The first is what we know. It's things that are publicly available, websites, articles, social media, things that we can just research and learn about the company. The next is what we presume, and that's the hypothesis we generate about ourselves or the competition to highlight their strengths and weaknesses. I think I just said strengths. We'll go with that. But finally, we have this idea of what we learn, and this is the critical element of how to source great competitive intelligence. This is what will separate you from the rest. Digging into things like review sites, win-loss interviews, SME interviews or reviews. And I want to talk a bit about this here because it's so critically important. Now, I was going to ask show of hands who here has used G2 Crowd before, but I can't see you all, so I'm going to assume everyone's hand is in the air. Review sites are so critical. And what I've often done in the past is you can go to a G2 Crowd, you can grab some of those reviews, some of the strengths and weaknesses, toss it into an LLM and say, "Give me a summary." Super valuable. I think that that's a great starting place because that offers validation for the facts that we create. Here's a fact. Oh, and here's a customer that said exactly this. Within Klue, we offer something called the Review Insights module, which takes all the review sites across thousands of different but thousands of reviews across many different sources like Trust Radius, G2, Capterra, all the good stuff, and it summarizes it for you, making your life even easier, sending it into Battlecards. From a win-loss perspective, we have this idea of buyer insights. How do we learn why our buyer either went with us or why the buyer or prospect chose the competitor? By interviewing them, folks who haven't just been on a review site, right? A review site is kind of like a customer who was never a customer of yours. They were a customer of your competitor, and you can learn what their opinion is. But how much more detailed can you get when you talk to a prospect who is considering you and why they went with you or not? This is our win-loss module, and it is fantastic for highlighting those key themes of why we won or lost that can help really navigate or help you navigate your Battlecard content as you go forward. The final element is sales call insights, listening to gong calls. This is a gold mine of intel where your sellers are talking directly to prospects, hearing what they're saying about the competition, hearing what they're even saying about you, objections. And when you listen in and you can withdraw those insights, you get fantastic primary sources of intel that can influence your battle cards and make your content great. This is Klue's Gong Insights module. I absolutely love it. So far we've talked about how to make great content, 2 Battlecard essentials, and how to source great competitive intelligence. But now let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about how to get your content used. And here we have our 5 Battlecard template best practices. And those best practices are: Well, before I talk about that, I want to just say the goal here, which is we wanted to get our battle cards used, but even better than that is we want to get the content to be reused. We don't just want folks to see the content once. We want them to want to come back to the content again and again, knowing they're going to get value out of the content. And these 5 tips, I believe, are the key to doing so. So those 5 tips are optimize your real estate, minimize scroll depth, tailor battle cards to sales, deduplicate, and consistency is key. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. That's a terrible joke. Let's dive into all of these one at a time. Now, back in the day, I used to work in advertising. And we had this saying when we were creating commercials that you have to capture attention within the first 7 seconds. We called that the hook. And I think the same thing applies to Battlecard content. If you want folks to actually use your content, you need to offer a hook. But what often happens when I'm seeing Battlecards the first time is they start with something maybe not so hooky. See things like company overview or who are they or number of employees. And this is valuable information, but it doesn't draw in the attention. What I believe we have to do is to flip that script. And actually, we had a great question come through because I think some of these questions are so potent with how we navigate our battle cards. This question from Lizzie was, what's your thought process behind knowing what info to prioritize? Well, Lizzie, I think the answer here is putting the tactical content first. Things like why we win, pricing, objection. When you lead with that content, the critical stuff, sellers immediately know, hey, there's value here and I can stick around. What you can even do is take some of the foundational intel and tuck it away in another card at the bottom, kind of small here, called More Resources, where you can link to or share additional slides on company overview, features, more. Really, really great for optimizing real estate. Now, another great question from Maha here. What's your take on feature comparisons versus value battle cards? Great question, because oftentimes we'll hear from curators, look, I want all of our sellers to just focus on value. Feature parity, it doesn't work. But I believe you can actually combine those. And when you start with features, you can actually layer in value. Again, a little bit small here. We can talk about what's the value behind the feature and how do we communicate that. An example that comes to mind here is Mad Men, when Don Draper talks about how coffee beans are roasted, or toasted rather. Everyone has toasted their not coffee beans, I think it was tobacco beans. Josh, be better. Tobacco beans. But by being the first to communicate the value of what you do, that is how you win deals. So feature and value, you got to combine them. Next, we'll talk about minimizing scroll depth. This is the type of content I see all too often from curators. We see them just load paragraph after paragraph about the competitor and hope that sellers are going to read it. But what this will do is it will make your sellers fall asleep. So instead, we have to have some rules of thumb, how to keep it nice and tight. And my rule of thumb here is no more than 2,000 characters per battle card. So keep it short and succinct. Next, tailor battle card to sales. Some folks think there's a one-size-fits-all for the entire sales audience. There is not. There are 3 types of battle cards I recommend creating. Foundational, this is for like your SDRs or other internal teams where you include everything, where you can do research about the competitor. Next, you have your tactical battle cards, why we win, why we lose, objection handling. And you have a competitor at a glance. This is for your experienced sellers where you just have a one-pager about the competition. Really, really great for keeping it nice and succinct and tailored towards individual audiences so that they know when they come to Klue, they're getting just what's important to them. Deduplicate, never have the same content written twice. Here's an example. Why we lose, objection handling. Well, this is the same content, just in 2 different formats. Let's deduplicate and keep it simple. And finally, consistency is key. This is Netflix, and we're also familiar with the bottom right beautiful little button called Skip Intro. Well, guess what? Other companies can leverage the idea of consistency to make it so that we know exactly what to expect, which elevates our user experience. And we can do the same elevation of user experience with the battle cards. Let's use the same format in all of our battle cards so that sellers know what to expect and where to expect it. So, great content and how to get content used. I know I flew through that last part, but you will get these slides after, I do promise. But there's something else I want to talk about here. I want you to consider this. It's this idea that, yes, we're talking about how to build deal-winning battle cards, but maybe there's something more happening here. Is it just about the battle card when it comes to winning deals? When you create great content, you're looking to create content that is both really valuable, it's great, and it gets used. And I think a good example of this is one of my favorite content programs of the year, Spotify Wrapped. It's so good. Every December, I look forward to it, to not just seeing what my personal top artists and songs are, but I want to share this content with my peers, with my family. I want to hear and see what's best for them. They've created really great content that needs to be used. It's that good. But the way that they've done it is they've actually done something bigger. Spotify has elevated the culture of music. They've made it so that we're not just sharing song links over the course of a year, but we're all experiencing this phenomenon of Spotify Wrapped. I think we can actually do something similar in our companies. If we're able to influence the culture of compete inside of our companies, we're able to then create this flywheel of success, getting everyone excited about compete, wanting to share, seeing the benefits of this flywheel of how when they share, others learn, they win, they share back. Folks, if we can do that, we start with great content, but then we actively take this role inside of our compete programs to generate a better culture. This is how you win more competitive deals.
Josh, thank you so much. That was awesome. How do you help sales when there aren't any clear-cut differentiators in your battle cards?
That is such a good question. And I think it actually harkens back to that Mad Men conversation I was bringing up earlier. There is always going to be parity inside of your competitive landscape. The trick is that you need to know how to spin that clarity into value, or sort of that parity into value, and then leverage that first ahead of your competitors. I don't believe that there's never clear-cut differentiators. I believe that we just haven't figured out the messaging behind it. So that's your goal, is to figure out, how do I spin this in a way that really connects to prospects' needs, and then be the first to communicate that to them?
How does creating great battle cards support a win-loss program? And maybe vice versa too.
Yeah, well, I think that battle cards are intended to get your sellers to do things, right? Obviously, we have to know about the competitor, but we want them to do a lot as well. And so when you create great battle cards, you can actually inspire your sellers to offer a lot of value and be a trusted advisor, such that if the prospect goes with us or doesn't go with us, they're at least open to a win-loss interview. So I really recommend putting in some of those little sprinkles of questions to getting your prospect excited about participating, being a part of this entire sales wheel, so that you can help them along their journey and they're more inspired to help you with win-loss. Hope that answers the question.
Definitely. And I know, talking to Hunter, shout out Hunter, who runs our program here at Klue, there's a lot of ways that he's using win stories, loss stories in like unique ways in the battle card content too, whether it's win story embeds into certain battle cards so that there's either the associated like social proof or clip, or even like the video itself of the customer or the buyer talking about the specific differentiators within that battle card. Like, he's doing a lot of unique stuff within Klue as well.
Yeah, I think going from battle card to win-loss is interesting. What's even better, as Adam just said, is going from win-loss into battle card to make the content really shine.
Absolutely. There's nothing that beats out from the buyer's voice themselves. Can you cover how Klue helps measure the impact of battle cards, whether it's users, views, revenue, maybe a high level overview of as to how like Klue views like the measuring the impact of battle cards?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have the exact stats on me, but here's what I will say. So Klue connects to our favorite CRM, Salesforce. And what we can see in Klue is that when folks select a competitor and they can see the battle card in Klue connected to that opportunity, we can then measure the variable win rates of folks who use that content versus folks who don't. And the results are pretty astronomical, that folks who leverage Klue in the battle cards, we can see that ROI being generated in the amount of deal revenue won. Maybe we can follow up afterwards with a bit of those specific metrics, but connecting to your CRM is the way. It is the magic sauce.
This is an interesting one too, that we hear a lot around how much time should I allot to a certain competitor, right? Like, what's your strategy, or what's the kind of tipping point on how much content you create on a competitor? What warrants a battle card or a full kind of rundown versus maybe not so much? How do you look at that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we often segment our competitors into 3 tiers. We have our tier 1, tier 2, and then I call everything else ankle biters. So what I'd recommend is this. For tier 1, we have our standard battle card templates. Leverage those, build out the tactics. For the ankle biters, you should always be creating it the moment you hear them, even one time, because one time means it can happen again. And we want to make sure that sellers know that we have an answer and they know where to go, which in this case is your competitive repository. Whenever that competitor comes up again, keep it simple, why we win, potential objections, and go.
Josh, I am so appreciative of you taking the time here. Where can they reach out to you if they want to follow up with any of their own questions, Josh?
Yeah, great question. Please email me, josh.gladstone@klue.com. I'm here. Find me on LinkedIn, whatever it might be. Here to help. Love this conversation. Love this topic. And Adam, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Folks, we'll get the slides over to you. There's also an ultimate battle card building template for you, which is a lot of the principles that Josh has just walked through that lots of folks love to use. So you can download that one as well. We'll see you at Klue Quarterly. And then next month, we will be joined by two of our win-loss experts here at Klue on how to recruit and run a win-loss interview. So with that said, thank you all, and we'll catch you next month.